There it is.
Hey man, don't mistake being real for being rude. Don't. West Side 2-1. West Side. Fell through the club looking right. Chick shot a shot, but she don't know I got a wife. But let me flash this ring, cause my wife like to fight. Plus niggas get in trouble every day being nice. Same kind of nigga with the locks. I was black power, though the shit was really hot. Was talking about race when everybody said stop. And I do it for the street, nigga still on the block. Hey, real school nigga, I ain't never had to lie. Type of nigga turn his homework in no time. Grad school grind, got 3 degrees now, but when the white folks see me, they sit in the profile. Hey, oh, nah. What you said, what I said. Oh, nah. What you said, what I said. Oh, nah. What you said, what I said. Oh, nah.
Yeah, man. Shout out to everybody coming in right now.
All at home, but I was repping Bryan, Texas. This verse for everybody putting on for they section. Gotta thank the hood for the tough life lessons. The time I was stressing and praying for
shout out to you.
Shit, what you see is what you get. Unlike white women hating black people, loving black dick. Type to claim it, they ain't racist cause they got a black friend. I know it sound provocative, but it really happens. Shit, what's happening? No need for me capping. A wallet in the phone and some keys, what I'm packing. Keys that start cars, not keys, niggas strapping. Usually got my kids with me, gotta keep them happy. Oh, nah. What you said, what I said. Oh, nah. What you said, what I said. Oh, nah. What you said, what I said. Oh, nah. What you say.
Yo, hey everybody. So I know that y'all are probably wondering who I is, but I'm just here to introduce this amazing, talented, ridiculously black on top of black conscious man right here, Mr. George Lee, aka Conscious. He's a speaker, facilitator, and self-proclaimed edutainer. George believes that an edutainer is what you get when you cross education and entertainment. That's what happens when those two things line up. As you just saw, this man has a multitude of talents that he can pull out of his hat at all times. George uses his talent and expertise, resources, and all of those things specifically, and particularly his social media, to edutain everybody on racial issues, gender bias, and to highlight everybody speaking their truth. So without further ado, we're going to hop into this conversation with George and myself tonight as an extra guest, Hope Giselle.
Man, thank you, Hope. Appreciate you, Hope, man. Y'all know that I'm a student of Huey P. Newton. You know what I'm saying? And Huey P. Newton says that power is the ability to define the phenomenon and make it act in a desired manner. And damn it, the phenomenon we're going to be getting into today is how people is lost in the sauce of trans homonegativity. And don't worry, I got learning objectives for us, learning outcomes, where you're going to be very clear on what our itinerary is. And also I'm going to unpackage a lot of these words that I'm using. You know what I'm saying? If I got the PowerPoint, and I'm gonna bring Hope back on at the end. She's gonna be doing the Q&A, helping us with the Q&A, as well as giving us some insight. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So see you in a few, Hope. Yeah. So without further ado, you know, I'm George Lee, aka Conscious Lee. Don't forget to lead. You can find me at georgeleespeaks.com. We're about to get into the lost in the sauce, unconscious consciousness of trans homonegativity. That's what we're getting into. Keep me going. So this as a disclaimer, you know, this as a disclaimer. A note about language. Language is vibrant. Language is fluid. It grows, it changes, it develops generationally, culturally, and demographically. I know that tonight I'm going to be using a lot of terms and language that is still evolving and that's, you know what I'm saying, that's still transcendent. Today is not the day for you to bring your archaic understandings of particular terms and try to weaponize them against how things are transcendent. You know what I'm saying? With that being said, language also creates and expresses meaning. That's literally how we are able to bring meaning to our realities is with language. So we want to make sure that we're being purposeful as well as intentional with our words. Damo, you got a thing showing up again. Get up off of there, sir. So we also know that language must not demean, exclude, or offend. And that's very, very important for us to talk about in terms of getting into the lost in the sauce of the trans homonegativity, because we know that a lot of people kind of get loose with their language. And, you know, my grandfather used to always say the pathway to hell is paved with good intentions. What this means is that you can have great intentions and desires with your words you're trying to have, but it does not negate the negative intentions or the negative impacts that can come from you using your language. You feel me? That being said, I want to make sure we're understanding what we're getting into. When I say the unconscious consciousness, I'm talking specifically about how Bowler's pedagogy of discomfort would expose students to what she calls inscribed habits of unintention or the willingness to dwell in beliefs inherent and critically. Megan Bowler is a professor of education she's a professor of education at University of Toronto. And what she gets into is how we should be exploring the discomfort, exploring the education of discomfort, and how when we are uncomfortable, that's how we are learning. And when we know that we're getting out of our comfort zones, that's how we're being stretched. And that's the only way that we're going to be able to, I feel like, be better as society, be better as people, unless we are learning how to not only be uncomfortable, but literally be able to embrace this discomfort. Straightforward. The unconscious consciousness is the implicit and explicit ways in which we affirm our epistemologies, knowingly and unknowingly. When I say epistemologies, people, I'm specifically talking about your knowledge production, where you get your knowledge claims from. For instance, if you think that sex and gender are the same thing, that comes from a particular epistemological understanding. If you think that men are inherently supposed to be protectors and women are supposed to be, nurturers, that comes from a particular epistemological understanding. If you believe that Christopher Columbus sold the ocean blue in 1492, that comes from a particular epistemological understanding. So when we talk about the unconscious consciousness of whatever we're talking about, you can go to the next one. This is specifically what we're getting into. Is how the first sign of successful pedagogy and discomfort is quite simply the ability to recognize what it is and what that is that one doesn't know and what it is that one does not know. Develop emotional investments to protect oneself from knowing. What we're getting at is that when it comes to being lost in the sauce, we so conditioned. Our conditioning is conditioned. And what we would do in terms of pushing forth this conditioning that we have is that we won't be able to recognize what it is that one doesn't want to know in terms of how we are invested in these subconscious, unconscious ways of perpetuating bad shit for wonderful people. Next slide. Context is key. Anytime we talking, anytime you hear somebody talking, whether you having a casual conversation or whether you listening to a lecture, whether you listen to your boss, what we know is context is always key. And what I think is important, especially when we're getting into talking about the being lost in the sauce, is making sure that we're able to bring legitimacy to what I call the language of my nurturer. I know that a lot of times when people use ebonics and slang, people don't see it as being something that can be intellectual or something that can be knowledgeable. So I want to be purposeful in giving you this definition that comes from the Urban Dictionary. See, a lot of y'all, we can recognize that a lot of the things that us as Black people, we say, it usually get demonized and pathologized when we saying it. But as soon as people of the mainstream start thinking it's hip and cool, all of a sudden this, is what it's down. So lost in the sauce is an existential state of uncertainty defined by transcendent, even blissful confusion. Lost in the sauce. When you hear me say it in the video, I'm talking literally about how people have uncertainty and even blissful confusion in the way that they be proud, loud, and wrong. Shout out to the people that are proud, loud, and wrong. This Lost in the Sauce lecture series is dedicated to you. Next. But this last thing in this disclaimer, I recognize that my teaching experience, my teaching perspective is going to be a little bit different than what y'all used to. I wanted to make sure I'm giving y'all this disclaimer. Not only this disclaimer in embracing the discomfort of education, but also this disclaimer. And I recognize that I might come off as being a little bit provocative, but there's a purpose to the provocativeness. and making sure that, hey, listen, it's a method to the madness. So I recognize that my teaching method, my presentation method might be a little bit different than what y'all are used to, but I want to encourage you to stay with me. And I'm trying to have as much transparency as possible. That way, you know, we can have a shared vulnerability. You know what I'm saying? That's how we know the learning experiences become great. With that being said, my gender pronouns is he, him, and they. And when we're talking about the unconscious consciousness of trans homonegativity, it's important that I should have led with, you know what I'm saying, my name and thinking about those gender pronouns. We're going to get more into that when I get to this portion about privilege and heteronorms. You know, to the next thing. Our learning objectives for today, you know what I'm saying? When I say there's a method to the madness, there's no cap in my rap at all. There is literally, you know, some methods to the madness. The things we're going to be doing today, we're going to be getting into, we're going to be exploring sexuality and gender and how they are distinct. We're going to define terms important to trans homonegativity. We're going to discuss ways to make members of the LGBTQ community feel included from an intersectional lens. And last but certainly not least, we're going to be understanding this history accompanied with trans homonegativity, as well as being able to get into these very key terms. Let's get it. Hey, before I get into this right here, when I started first talking about trans homonegativity, specifically talking about homophobia and transphobia on my social media platforms, I had a lot of my homeboys come at me and talking about some, hey man, I ain't homophobic, I ain't transphobic. That means you scared. That means you fear them. I ain't scared of them. I don't fear them. I just don't want them around me. Now I can get into my intellectual bag in terms of the thinking about philosophy, about how the desire of you not wanting to be around trans and gay people is literally derived, structured by fear. But I don't get into that. But when I get into these stigmatized terms, it's important that you're able to divorce your ego from these old facts. Homophobia and transphobia are two terms that refer to negative attitudes towards homosexual and trans people. Although these expressions may spark the idea of an irrational fear of homosexual and gender nonconforming people, what we recognize is that a lot of y'all be able to hide behind, you know, divine doctrine, hide behind religion, hide behind different values that make you aware you get to rationalize with this idea of literally inscribing fear that turns into hate, that turns into violence onto people that you don't want to rock with. You know what I'm saying? And it's important that we really think about how, in terms of language, when we say language is vibrant, language is fluid, language is transcendental, and thinking about how these terms become stigmatized and how when people have to be identified by these terms, it automatically inscribes that stigma onto their bodies. So I wanted to make sure we clear. When I say trans homonegativity, I'm talking specifically about the negative attitudes and practices affecting the well-being of the LGBTQ plus IA identities in politically, socially, and economically settings. To my trans people, to my trans family, don't listen. I want to make this very, I understand that I'm an outsider talking about a community that I'm not a part of. When I use the terminology trans homonegativity, I'm not conflating trans identities with being with being homosexual or with being gay. I recognize that there's a distinction between sex and gender, which I'm going to be trying to, give me a little edutaining to the people that's viewing this. But I want to make sure I'm clear. I recognize that the LGBT community is structured by a hierarchy. And damn it, I'm a debater. You feel me? And being a debater, I'll be willing to debate anybody that the trans identity is at the bottom of the hierarchy within the LGBTQ identity. You know what I'm saying? With that being said, the L, the G, the B, and all of us cisgender people have to really be mindful and really be intentional when we think about how we orient ourselves towards not only trans peoples, but trans identities. First lecturette, man. So usually when I do these, the reason why I'm doing this Lost in the Sauce lecture series is to show that I do diversity and inclusion workshops, as well as workshops that's trying to edify and educate, literally trying to increase consciousness, not only in the workplace, but also in social media, also in politics, right? So when I do these workshops, I always like to have an activity. Because I know with doing activities within workshops, that's how we get the brain rolling. You feel me? That's how we get the brain rolling, right? So when I start doing these virtually, and you know what I'm saying, I'm doing them longer, there will be, you know, times for us to break out groups for Zoom and do these activities. But for today, in the comment section, I'm asking for y'all a little bit of what we call participation. In the comment section, what is your understanding of gender? What is the difference, in your opinion, between gender and sex? Comment section. I'm curious to hear from the comment section. What is your understanding of gender? And what is the difference between sex and gender, in your opinion, from your perspective? We can just have one or two people, one or two at least. We can move on, but I just want to make sure I'm engaging with the people that's listening, because I want to make sure that I'm meeting y'all where y'all at. And I think that I want to contextualize what I mean by sex and gender based off of where y'all at. You feel me? I know when it comes to education and being able to embrace the education of discomfort, if I can't be real with myself, I can't be real with nobody else. And in order for me to be real with y'all, I got to be having, you know what I'm saying, some back and forth, you know. So gender is a social construct of norms. Shout out to Daniel Quinn. Definitely agree with that right there. We also have gender is what you feel you are. Sex is what you physically embody. I like that one right there. I definitely like that. Gender is how you present and perform, man. Shout out to Butler. You know what I'm saying? Make me put me in my academic mind. You know, gender is what you perform. Gender is an individual expression. We're gonna be getting into a little bit about gender identity and gender expression, and how these two things are distinct phenomenons. Gender is how you want to be seen, and sex is how you were born. Okay. I like what y'all. I like. Okay. So for everybody that commented, man, tell a friend to tell a friend. We about to get into this little first mini lecturette, getting into the actual distinctions between sex and gender, because a lot of y'all be really lost in the sauce of heteronormativity. Don't worry, I'm gonna define it later. And you conflate sex and gender, and you automatically believe that how you are assigned your sex at birth should automatically be correlative or automatically equate to how you express your gender. And this is where, you know what I'm saying, don't do it. I'm starting to get ahead of myself. Now I'm getting excited. But we're making this distinction between sex and gender, right? Sex refers to the biological differences between male and females, such as the genitalia and genetic differences. This is more about your chromosomes, more about your gonads. You feel me? That's more what sex is situated with. Gender, however, is much more difficult to define, but it can refer to the role of a male or female in society, known as gender roles. What we also know is that gender is not binary. Gender is not binary. Gender roles, or an individual concept of themselves or gender identity. When it comes to thinking about the distinctions of gender and sexuality, it's important that we have a very intersectional understanding of how these two things are distinct. Because if we don't, we fall prey to literally making the word beautiful people have to go through bad shit for us to learn things. And I think that that is a privilege that a lot of us people that are outside of the LGBT community take for granted a lot. That we have the privilege of bumping our heads and messing over somebody else and literally not having to be held accountable, because it's like, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know. That's why we're doing this here lecture for. It's to make sure that when you lost in the sauce of trans homo negativity, you know exactly what you're doing and who you're doing it to. You know what I'm saying? Because what we know about gender and sexuality, especially when it comes to gender, we're going to get to it, is that these are social constructs. And this is the thing about social constructs, y'all. Pertaining to the society that we are talking about, they're going to have a different way that they construct gender. Here's an example. When we think about Africa prior to the European engagement, we know that there were different understandings of gender that made it where it wasn't seen as a binary. Another example, when we think about the Americas prior to European engagement, we know that many different tribes practiced that there were different various genders, right? So what we know about social constructs is that it's something that exists not objective to reality, but as a result of human interaction, as it exists because humans agree that it exists. That is literally the only reason why, right? And when it comes to thinking about, gender norms and social constructs, I want to be very clear. We have to stop conflating naturalization with normalization and thinking that what has been normalized in society is what is actually natural in society. And I think that this is a lot of how discursive violence happens, is that you think that what has been normalized and what's been practiced for decades and centuries is actually what is natural. And this is what I mean by being lost in the sauce, right? You will become emotionally invested in some shit that is really empirically just false and wrong. But because you get a little bit of, sense of self, a sense of power, a sense of domination, and how society got you conditioned in this social construct, you will then try to justify it by marginalizing, demonizing, disavowing, disregarding people of the LGBTQ community, and that shit ain't real at all. You know what I'm saying? I think that if you claim to be an activist and especially trying to be pro-black, you got to make sure your pro-blackness is not some shit that's structured within white supremacy that's just in blackface. You know what I'm saying? Nobody wants white supremacy in blackface. I promise you that. You feel me? Like, we, instead of having dire white supremacy, we rather had a real thing. You know what I'm saying? So with that being said, make sure you ain't faking the phone. So I know a lot of y'all might be asking, consciously, you made a distinction between sex and gender, and you talked about how gender is a social construct. So a lot of you might be asking, is sex a social construct? Well, if you're asking that, the social construction of gender is a theory of feminism and sociology about the operation of gender and gender differences in society. Hey, to my pro-black people, I'm going to do a lecture specifically about the distinctions between black feminism and white feminism. But make sure that if you're really claiming to be a freedom fighter and you represent and respect black women, let's not disavow the entire literature base of feminism because you believe that white women did the shit, right? Like, I want to be very, very clear with that. Black feminism was literally structured and created out of criticism of white feminism and how white women were trying to push black women into these boxes. So I want to make sure I'm saying it right. But according to this view, in terms of this feminine and sociology, studies, is that according to this view, society and culture create gender roles, and these roles are prescribed as ideal or appropriate behavior for people of a specific sex. And this is where I get into my bag about respectability politics, right? Usually I talk about respectability politics from a perspective of race. When I talk about how the mainstream white people particular want to make it where we always already appeal to their values, to their morals, to their ethics, even if they wrong, even if we're trying to challenge their very morals and ethics. What I want to talk about very specific is that in that last slide, I'm also want to think about how respectability politics operate around gender and sexuality, and how respectability politics and literally what is known to be respectful or not respectful, how it operates in terms of gender performance as well as gender identity. Because we'll be planning ourselves if we only can think about respectability politics insofar as white supremacy and not think about how respectability politics is also structured in in heteronormativity and transphobia and gender roles. So let's be mindful when we think about what it means to be respectful, how power and privilege literally structures how we get to be seen as being respectful. With that being said, right, it's a multiplicity of sexualities, We have pansexual. This is a great video right here for people that want to know more about the different sexualities. This is a wonderful educational source for you to go and explore. Don't take my word for it. I think it's important that we try to make it where we learn about things of the LGBT community from people within the LGBT community. And this is when I recognize me being straight and cis. You know what I'm saying? Make it where people like listen to me. You know what I'm saying? Because people listen to me, y'all get to hear shit that I'm repeating that people in the LGBT community have been saying for years, right? With that being said, though, I just want to make sure we can recognize that there is a multiplicity in sexuality, and that, we have bisexual, we have pansexual, we have asexual. And when I do the longer Lost in the Sauce lecture series, when I'm getting into the unconscious consciousness of trans homonegativity, I will be defining these different sexualities and how these different sexualities kind of are identified and positioned within the spectrum of sexuality. Because damn it, it's a spectrum. And I also be getting more and unpackaging more about what I mean sexuality being a spectrum. You know what I'm saying? Hey, being a straight black man from the hood, right? Something that I had to think very consciously on before I felt like got unapologetic in what I was on is thinking about what it means to be seen as being suspect, or think about what it means to be seen as buying into these heteronormative tropes, where I start to perpetuate and reify, I feel like, a whole bunch of elementary understandings of sexuality and gender, right? And what I started to recognize is that I had to be able to live in my truth and being able to speak my truth and speaking truth to power. And this what brought me to this understanding of the OG, the great Kimberly Crenshaw, and really why I do what I do and how I do it, right? I try to, shout out to the intersectionality gang. Shout out to the whole intersectionality gang to potty trail, you know what time it is, right? Intersectionality, right? It's the lens through which you can see where power comes and collides. See my fingers right here? If we have, you know what I'm saying, my fingers right here, you see how they collide? Intersectionality is about how me trying to be pro-black and being a cisgender man from, you know what I'm saying, the hood, and trying to make it where I can be seen as being cool. I have to think about intersectionality and how different black people in the black community are positioned differently, right? And Kimberly Crenshaw intersectionality studies was able to make me think about how there are multiple experiences in the black community, right? I just got done talking about the multiplicity and sexuality, and I think that it went perfectly into a conversation of intersectionality. See, it's not that it's a race problem here or a gender problem here or a class or LGBTQ problem there. Many a times that framework erases what people, how people are subject to all those things, right? I think that once I started thinking about how black feminism derived from white women trying to make black women only think about being a woman, and how, you know, black men were trying to force black women to only think about being black, how it literally forced and erased a lot of the understandings of black women at the core, right? I think that when we force people to be at war with themselves, that creates a lot of psychological violence. And I think that it's really not being real with how our identities are situated, right? Audre Lorde says that we don't live single issue lives. So because we don't live single issue lives, we shouldn't think about these things as being single issues. You know what I'm saying? Like, I am a black man, but I am man, I am black, I am gender, I am sexual, I have a sexuality, I have a particular socioeconomic background. When thinking about intersectionality is making sure that we not only accounting for the black people that praise the same God as we praise, and making sure we don't account for the black people, excuse my language, but that fuck the same way that we fuck. You know what I'm saying? It is very easy for us to get caught up into being lost in the sauce of sameness, where we gloss over difference. And intersectionality is for us to be able to understand how the beauty of all of us, whether you black or not, is how we are different. And when we start focusing on, man, we all bleed red, we all put our pants on the same way, this starts glossing over the beauty of how we are different. You know what I'm saying? Which brings me to this next lecturette. Understanding heteronorms. And that's why I made sure I made the distinction between normalization and naturalization. Normativity is the assumption in an individual. I did too fast. Normativity is the assumption in an individual in institutions that everyone is heterosexual and that heterosexuality is superior to other identities. When institutions and systems are able to structure itself based off of who they account for and who they don't and who they do not account for, we have to think about how heteronorms become institutionalized, right? This is what I always love to say, man. Assholes come in all shapes, colors, and sizes. I'm gonna repeat that. Assholes come in all shapes, colors, and sizes. The issue is when you're able to have a system or an institution that can back you up or enforce you being an asshole. As straight people, as heterosexual people, we have the ability to make it where institutions and systems can enforce us being an asshole. Do not be lost in the sauce. Heterosexism, the system of oppression that reinforces the belief in the inherent superiority or heterosexuality and heterosexual relationships, thereby negating the lives and relationships of those who do not identify as heterosexual. Now, I'm gonna have a part in this where I talk specifically about, I feel like privilege and my privilege of being straight and being cisgender, but specifically in thinking about heteronorms, I was literally, I think, forced to think about consciously my privilege one day walking through campus, right? One day I was walking through campus, you know what I'm saying? I'm the coordinator of debate at the University of Oklahoma, as well as a professor of human diversity and social work at the University of Oklahoma. And sometimes when I'm walking through campus, you feel me? I like to peep game, peep the scene, you know what I'm saying? And I seen this cute white lesbian couple walking across the street. And I shouldn't say cute. I feel like that's kind of weird me saying cute. So I'm gonna be mindful like that. I shouldn't say, I ain't gonna say that right there. But I seen this lesbian couple walking across the street. And when they walked across the street, I seen them looking behind them, kind of watching their backs more than I felt like I would if I was walking across the street with my wife. And I thought about heteronormativity in terms of PDA, you know, public display of affection, and how heteronorms allow for us straight people to be able to show our significant other how much we love them and care for them in public spaces. But thinking about how people of the LGBT community literally have heteronorms weaponized against them, where they got to worry about, hey, y'all holding y'all hands, y'all trying to push y'all gender and sexuality onto the kids, man. Oh, man, I don't want to see that. And I think about how I don't have to worry about somebody telling me that because I want to kiss my wife in a public space that I'm forcing my gender or forcing my sexuality onto the kids. When we talk about heteronorms, it's politically, socially, economically, spiritually, through entertainment, through media, through music, thinking about the ways in which normativity of being heterosexual is literally conditioned in our society. And when we think about being lost in the sauce in the unconscious consciousness and thinking about how a lot of people correlate normalization with naturalization and they don't recognize they redefine these norms, man. With that being said, I want to make sure I define cisgender, right? Cisgender is defined as denoting or relating to a person whose sense of personal identity and gender corresponds with their birth at sex. Or how I would put it, cisgender means that you identify with the birth that was assigned to you. I mean, you identify with the sex that was assigned to you at birth, recognizing that gender is assigned to us at birth, that literally we're going off of the interpretation of the doctor. When they slap your ass and you cry, they say, is it an M? Is it an F? Literally the assigned birth, the assigned sex that you have at birth is based off of the doctor that helps you come out the womb. You feel me? So it's important to thinking about how that people can be misassigned at birth, or how people can be forced into this gender binary that literally misrepresents or misidentifies the way they're going to be able to express themselves. See, I think about it being a millennial. I think about growing up when I was always hear about Sierra goodies. I used to always hear conversations about people trying to say Sierra was a hermaphrodite. Well, I first want to talk about how that was very transphobic for us to try to, you know what I'm saying, play with her like that. But I do want to point out that the correct term is intersex. Formerly known as hermaphrodite is a term that is now considered antiquated and offensive. Intersex is used to describe a person whose biological sex is difficult to categorize as either male or female. To me, this obviously proves that gender is not binary. But also in terms of thinking of intersectionality, we do recognize that there can be like bisexual trans men. And we do recognize that with people identifying as intersex, it doesn't dictate their sexuality. The intersex is a gender identity. You know what I'm saying? So I want to contextualize what I mean in between the distinctions between sex and gender, because you know how it is, you feel me? Hey, and then shout out to Daniel. Heteronormativity, when every romantic comedy drama ends up in marriage and we don't think about or recognize the privilege that we have in the marriage or whatever, that just caught my eye. I had to just throw it like, hey Daniel, that was a perfect comment to illustrate what we're getting into right now. You know, exploring heteronormative privilege, man. This is what I recognize. Power and privilege tends to listen to power and privilege. Before I get into that slide, power and privilege tends to listen to power and privilege. I want to be very clear. A lot of y'all give me credit y'all shouldn't give me, right? A lot of y'all give me credit for being very brilliant and coming up with a lot of great ideas. And I think that they don't come from me. You know what I'm saying? I think that in me being a cisgender straight man, I got to be able to check my privilege and be able to acknowledge my shit, right? The reason why y'all listen to me when it comes to LGBTQ shit is because of how I perform my gender. And I recognize that I have the privilege in being listened to. And being real, a lot of y'all listen to me because I'm cisgender, and y'all literally don't listen to people of the LGBT community, especially trans women, right? So what I'm recognizing right now is a lot of shit y'all give me credit for saying. I'm literally just repeating shit that the people in the LGBT community been saying for centuries. She said, y'all don't hear them because y'all won't listen to them. You know what I'm saying? I want to make sure I explicitly said that because I know it's important for people. I think it's important for me to be able to say that and making sure that I don't get lost in the sauce of my own hype. Because it's real easy for people to drink their own Kool-Aid. And I want to make sure to my people that support me, that's in the LGBT community, if I ever say something that's foul, that's wild, I want y'all to jump on my head. You feel me? I want you to Simon Cowell my ass. Like, I think that in me being a cisgender straight man, I have to stay implicated in my position, right? It don't get to be like, well, I read all this shit. And because I read all this shit, hope better not come at me no certain way. And this one, it's like, nah, that's not how it works, right? It's not that I can read all this literature about being trans and about trans identities, and then I can't say that I'm being transphobic. You know what I'm saying? Like in this instance, I want to say, shout out to Dr. George Yancey. He talks about this idea of being an anti-sexist. I am a anti-transphobia transphobe. I recognize I have to be implicated in being cisgender and seeing how I'm seduced every day by the power and privilege that I'm given as being cis. You know what I'm saying? With that being said, people, call me on my shit. Hold me accountable. I want to be better. You know what I'm saying? Like, I want to be better. And in being better, I have to be able to be called out. Privilege, a systemic and cultural advantage of unearned benefits, rights, and immunities that are given to certain groups generally at the expense of other groups in society. I did not work to be straight. I did not ask to be like it's literally unearned benefits. You feel me? That white woman Peggy McIntosh talked about white privilege as being a unearned, a knapsack of unearned privileges. But damn it, being straight also comes with a knapsack of unearned privileges. Being cisgender also comes with a knapsack of unearned privileges, which brings me right into this idea of being outed and how people really, I feel like people be whack when they do that. You know what I'm saying? To me, I don't think they recognize the psychological trauma and violence they cause to people when they outing is involuntary disclosure of one's own sexual orientation, gender identity, or intersex status, or revealing someone else's identity without the consent of that person. I think that in the age that we live in social media, we have to recognize, right? The reason why a lot of people don't like to talk about their gender identity in public spaces and places, because we don't really have safe spaces for us to talk about gender identities. You feel me? So when people try to weaponize someone's identity against them, not only is that some fake foul shit, we got to recognize that is literally perpetuating the violence of white supremacy, the violence of settler colonialism, the violence and oppression. So if you say you're an ethical person, or you're a person that tries to stick to some morals, it is immoral, it is unethical for you to out somebody. You know what I'm saying? You should not force somebody out of a closet. You know what I mean? That is for them to be able to do. And I think that a lot of us as straight people, we try to weaponize outing somebody. And I think that we know what we're doing. And I think that we need to stop that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't tell me about how Donald Trump is doing X, Y, and Z and you doing the same shit that he doing. You feel me? And this is not saying some shit like we can't talk about. I ain't doing it in a Uncle Tom type way. This is what I'm talking about specifically. If you are able to indict oppressive modes of being in one instance, you should be able to be consistent with that framework you've set and making it where you being consistent. Consistency is key. Damn it, consistency is key. And understanding gender binaries, man, we know that our innate, deeply felt psychological identification as man, women, or somewhere on the spectrum. Shout out to my gender nonconforming, gender fluid people, which may or may not correspond with our sex assigned at birth. And understanding gender binaries, we as society often lump together sex assigned at birth and gender. However, these things are distinctly different. So I took myself out. You go to the next slide. I ain't gonna read the next one, man. So, and coming to the end, transgender is a term that it's an umbrella term. It's used for people who do not match society's expectations regarding gender. Transgender people may or may not have medically changed their bodies through hormones and or surgery. Stealth is a term that is used within the trans community to describe those who are accepted by others at glance as being cisgender male or cisgender female who do not reveal their sex assigned at birth. Hope is gonna come in, and I feel like be able to give some insight. And I think in Hope too, I'm definitely curious when you come on. Am I stepping out of my boundaries talking about stealth? And I'm not a part of your community? Like, definitely let me know. Like, I'm definitely curious. Thinking about it consciously, it's like, because I'm thinking about it, like, what would it mean for a white person to get up talking about some, you know what I'm saying, racism shit and try to use a term that we use amongst ourselves? I'm definitely curious on that. But in terms of thinking about transgender identities, I want to make sure that I gave a definition, because I know that a lot of times people use terms and they don't really have an understanding of the terms they'll use, because terms can become so popularized or made normal and we just throw them around and we don't know what the hell they mean. You know what I'm saying? So I want to make sure that you're not lost in the sauce of your own misunderstanding. And that's the reason why I define that term, man. And understanding trans identities, trans negativity. And the reason why we're saying trans negativity is so y'all can't be on that bullshit talking about some, man, I ain't scared of trans people. I ain't transphobic. It's like, nah, nigga, you scared. But so that's why we did this, man. Trans negativity. Trans negativity is negative attitudes or feelings towards those who are gender variant and or the inability to deal with gender ambiguity. This can be internalized mental health as well. And understanding intersectionality, everybody in the LGBT community, really everybody in the world, I think that we all are dealing with trauma that we have experienced throughout our life. And it's important for all of us to come up with a space and place for us to deal with that shit. You feel me? Especially us that internalize oppression goes to all oppressed peoples, whether you black, whether you gay, whether you trans, whether you disabled, all of us oppressed peoples should carve out a time and space to do some self-care and self-help, where we literally think about how we are impacted by things that we internalize, man. Transsexual, hold on, Damo. I want to make sure I say this right here and then we get into it. Transsexual is an antiquated term. Do not use this terminology. This terminology is like saying Negro, like saying nigger or nigga. You feel me? Don't do that. You know what I'm saying? I would not be using that terminology no more. But I want to make sure I explicitly say it to the people that is trying to talk about trans identities. Do not use this old archaic ass, antiquated ass term. You know what I'm saying? It is not commonly used and is considered offensive. It is used to describe someone whose sense of themselves as a man or a woman is different from their sex assigned at birth. I'll say next one, man. I'm really excited. Really. Oh yeah, definitely. Another layered term, a term that I think we can spend some time in unpackaging, man. But finna have us a little conversation. How did I do?
You did as good as you can. No, I enjoyed it. I really did. I enjoyed it. I think that there was a lot of information in there that a lot of folks needed to hear. And especially, like you said, using your privilege as somebody who assists and performs in a specific way and performs your gender in a specific way. People needed to hear it, and they don't listen unless it comes from the mouths of cisgender women who perform in a certain way and also denounce trans women to some degree, or heterosexual cisgender men who don't appear to have what we in the Black community like to call sugar in your tank. So I think that it is really dope. But to jump right into the first two things that you wanted my just my opinion on, I think that when you talk about stealth, right, it's a layered term just because of it being a very communal word. It is something that, like, it's one of those things where it's kind of like community or family business, where it's just like, y'all ain't even supposed to really know what that means. You know, like, we're educating people. And so now the terms and the terminology and stuff are becoming public knowledge. But the idea of knowing what it means and then, I guess, condemning the girls for actually being stealth is not up to cisgender people. That is not your business. We do that. Y'all don't do that, because there are reasons for being stealth that I think that even the girls, as we criticize other women for being stealth, or make our opinions known about, how we feel about being stealth, it is not for the outside public to decide whether or not it's cool, because we understand why. Some of us just may not agree with that. So I think that on the term of self, that's just kind of where I would lay with it. It's okay for you to know what it means and, be able to describe it, but to then enact that and try to tell somebody what to do with it, that would be a little out of line. And then as it pertained to the term transsexual, that's a very layered term, because it is not what it was back then. So back then, like 2-3 years ago, I would have agreed with you that transsexual is a very offensive term, that it is one of those things that people use in place of the F word, the FAG word, or, something like that. They were used to demean trans women. Now, when we see a lot of folks using the word transsexual, especially when women or folks use it on themselves, it's because they've had some sort of sexual reassignment surgery, right? And so transgender folks are folks who are enacting the gender performance, whereas transsexual folks are people who are essentially volunteering the information of what their genitalia may or may not be based on sexual reassignment surgery. So it's not the derogatory term that people believe it to be, or that it once was. Now, back in the day, people used to say transsexual because it was just an extension of tranny, or, something like that. These days, it is more an extension of me not having to have that weird conversation, because in the word and in the verbiage, I'm telling you that I am a transsexual and not just transgender. I am not just performing a gender, but I have also had the reassignment surgery as well.
And that just blew my mind. Oh my God. I gotta reflect. I gotta reflect on that. Like, sheesh.
Yeah, but it's definitely not as negative. It did have that connotation back then, so I just think that that information, especially when it's written up by cis people, is a little outdated, just because I don't think that it holds the same premise as it used to back when we were growing up. It doesn't hold up, that same thing.
Yeah, definitely thank you for that. The end of the PowerPoint was trans people in their own voices. So really, I just feel like anything that you wanted to add into it, I think that it's important that I try to use my platform as much as possible to, I feel like, give space and place to things that need to be said and heard.
I think that my biggest thing is, especially because the audience, I'm sure, is predominantly Black, or at least people of color, is we have to keep having this conversation about all Black lives mattering and why that's important, and also why it was even a thing. I keep having to have these debates with folks and have these conversations with people about the reason for why it was even curated. A lot of the argument and a lot of the pushback that I'm getting is, well, y'all are Black, so what was the point of coming up with the all Black lives matter? Like, we get that, but clearly you don't, because when people are going to these marches and still experiencing transphobia and even violence in some cases, that goes to show us that we don't have space within the Black or within Black movements, even when those movements are particularly about or against violence. And I think that for a lot of folks in the Black community, there needs to be a mirror held up to the Black community's face that says, like, hey, look at this. Because what it really is saying to Black trans women who are being killed by Black men is that his life is more important than yours, because you've chosen to give up your masculinity. And so we don't fuck with you no more. And my thing is, if that's the case, then just say that, but don't make it seem as if, we're trying to occupy a space that doesn't belong to us because we are inherently gifted that space because we're Black. I don't need to justify my Blackness to anybody because it shows up. And, I have to justify my transness because people will negate it, or people will think that it's a phase, or people will completely outright disrespect it. But my Blackness is something that should not be disrespected. And I think that in a lot of cases with Black people, all of the arguments that they make become the antithesis when they need something. And then when they don't need anything, it's back to, okay, well, fuck those people. And prime example would be things like, oh, well, you're Black first. We hear that argument all the time. There's always the you're Black first argument. But it's never a you're Black first moment when there's something that is done that is happening to us violently. And especially if that thing happens to us violently and it's not done by the hands of another Black person. Tony McDade is Black first, But when people realized that Tony McDade was a trans man, nobody went out and really marched and rallied outside of other queer people and outside of, you know, forward-thinking students that were in Tallahassee. And this isn't what I think, this is what I know. I went to Tallahassee and spoke to the family and went to the protests and the marches. And it's ridiculous how little coverage Tony McDade's murder got. Tony McDade was murdered, gunned down, without a weapon, nothing, in broad daylight in the middle of the projects, and not a single riot, not a single like ridiculous over-the-top news headline. Black people did not riot. The projects didn't, you know, get set on fire or set ablaze. None of those things happened. But had Tony McDade been a cisgender Black man, we would have seen a completely different story. And I think that that's one of those things that I have to always talk about when it comes down to Black people, is that all Black lives matter. And that march in Brooklyn that was there to support and talk and speak to the lives of Black trans women that have been killed wasn't curated just because we want to co-opt the movement. It was because the movement did away with us. And so to get those points across, we had to create something that drew out people to pay attention to the fact that Black men are killing Black transgender women at ridiculous rates. And 2020 has been the deadliest year for Black transgender women in record. And we're still, you know, it's only been about 16 days since the last woman was killed. And it sucks to say, but 98% of those women are being killed by Black men. And I think that a large part of the reason why we're not acknowledging that, a large part of the reason why the Black community doesn't want to talk about those issues is because then we have to hold Black men accountable. And we ain't built for that. That's not what our culture is built for. We're not built for holding Black men accountable for their shit. We're built for protection of Black men at all costs, even when that means putting your own, you know, self-interest in harm's way. We are built to protect Black men. And that goes for cisgender women, that goes for children, that goes for elderly, and that goes for trans women who love them. All of us have been built and infiltrated and brainwashed to believe that our health, our safety, our emotional state should be tertiary to the emotional, the mental, the physical health and well-being of Black men. And so to talk about the killings of Black trans women, we would have to talk about the injustices of Black men. We would have to talk about the ways in which they treat cisgender women. And a lot of the cases, we have to talk about the ways in which Black men are not necessarily keen to the idea of authority that comes from queer and women's spaces. There's a lot of nuance to that conversation that I think the Black community just does not want to have. And we've been bamboozled into this space to believe that it's okay, and it's no longer okay. And I think there's a huge issue with All Lives Matter because everybody is not ready to say that this is not okay at the same time.
Because All Lives Matter is because I think you said basically it's like All Lives Matter is a very
all Black lives matter.
but to me, I'm thinking about like how all lives matter and the idea that you Black first, how they're very self-serving and very, you know, temporal. You know what I'm saying? It's very always in context. It's like you Black first, except for when I'm trying to whoop your ass and trying to, or all lives matter except for if you Black, and then it's that. And yeah, it seems like it has the same ideology almost.
Of course. And when we tell people this, they're just like, no, but it's not the same. The oppression is different, you know, and it's just like, but it's not. It's not. You're saying the same exact things that white people say to us when we're trying to get them to understand that we're not saying that the lives of white Americans don't matter. We're not saying that the struggles of white America does not matter. What we're doing is we're pointing out the nuances, right, by which white people have an advantage, by which white people are giving a head start, by which white people benefit from a system that was not there or placed, you know, or put in place for Black people to benefit. And then they turn around and say, no, but you have the same opportunities. And I feel like it's the same thing when we're talking about all Black lives matter. It's just like, well, why do you have to do this? We have all of these things already in place. We've already created a movement. We've already done this. So why do you need to do that? And I hate the whole argument of create your own, but then when we create it, there's a problem with the fact that it's created. So for instance, I believe it was last year where Angelica Ross, you know, called out Black Girls Rock and asked, you know, like, why are there no Black trans women on this roster when Janet Mock just landed the first deal of its kind as a Black trans woman, but still a Black woman with Netflix that was, you know, millions of dollars on her own to come and create content for them? Why are we not talking about the success of Angelica Ross's Candy on Pose? Why are we not talking about the success of India Moore as, you know, a biracial Black gender nonconforming person who landed a deal with Levine and Louis Vuitton and like all of these people at one time. And this is blackness. This is the blackness on display, and nobody was talking about it. And to see the comments of people saying, well, why do y'all need to be in this space? Like, why can't y'all create another thing? But you know what happens when we create our own things? Y'all come over there in that space too and say, well, this is being pushed on us. Why do our children have access to this? This shouldn't be something that's out there. People shouldn't be able to have, y'all are pushing this in our, and so it's just like, do y'all want us to create our own thing? Do y'all want us to integrate with your thing, or do y'all just want us to disappear? Because it doesn't seem like
a damn if you do, damn if you don't. It sounds like.
And if you're doing, you're damned if you don't. But I think that what people really want is for LGBT folks, and especially for Black trans women, to go back into the days of slinking and hiding and you know, back into the depths where people weren't proud of it. And I think that is a huge issue amongst a bunch of people for a multitude of different reasons that I think you did graze on and you touched on. But there has to be something that's done around toxic masculinity, toxic femininity, because I think that Black women feel like they're absolved from the crimes that happen against trans women because they're not the ones pulling the triggers or using the knives or choking people out. But, you know, enabling toxic masculinity and putting thoughts into the heads of Black men that make them feel inferior or like they'll be, because I think a lot of people don't understand or don't realize that a lot of Black women, that pillow talk that you have with Black men that emasculates him for liking certain things, then turns into anger and rage because Black men are not. Black men are not taught ways to truly and honestly hone in on their emotions. And so what happens is when you sit up and you pillow talk in bed and y'all are watching Star and you say something about Amaya Scott and how she looks so da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, but if I ever knew a nigga that da-da-da-da-da-da, what you don't realize is that you are then indoctrinating in him that he cannot be allowed to do those things because as his partner at the time, you are going to feel X, Y, and Z. And then that turns into this self-hate, that turns into this internalized transphobia, that turns into this every time I see a trans woman, I hear your voice in my head. And because I value your vagina, even though I'm attracted to this woman, I have to do away with this attraction. And that usually turns into violence for Black trans women. And I think that a lot of Black cis women are just like, oh, well, I didn't do nothing. Like, y'all need to be mad at the Black men that are killing y'all, not us, but y'all are a part of the problem. When you spit out those toxic femininity and you spit all of those messages and you think that men are just paying it dust, they're not. Because regardless of what a lot of Black cisgender women think, a lot of Black men are interested in both. A lot of Black men don't mind dating a transgender woman. A lot of Black men find us attractive. The problem is they feel as if they were to say that, what would happen is then they would be barred from the pussy. And it's not even if they would be barred from the pussy. And so it's one of those things where if I can't have both, then the one that is the majority is going to get my loyalty. And quite frankly, cis women are the majority, which is why Black trans women come up dead. And that's a problem. And a lot of folks are just not talking about that. And we're not holding some of our Black cisgender sisters accountable. Now, I'm not saying that this is all Black cisgender women, because there are some Black cisgender women that will beat your head in about a trans girl. And, you know, but there is a majority conversation around the ways in which Black cisgender women are engaging or talking about trans women around Black men that does help to fuel that fire, as well as the way that some Black cisgender women are raising Black men. So a lot of these topics are really nuanced, and a lot of them are things that need to be covered and need to be spoken about and are just not being spoken about. And then Black men taking accountability for their own fragility. And, you know, like you said, you can't be out here talking about you not scared. Yeah, you are. You're scared. You're scared. Yeah, you don't have to be fearful, like literally like running, hiding and screaming, you know, or ready to go cry. But you're fearful of what people are going to think of you and your manhood should you be honest about this particular thing about yourself. And what's always funny to me is that it's usually the most successful men. Like, don't get me wrong. You got some dirty dick trade. You do. You got some.
You got them.
Look, I'm just like, you always have a little dirty dick piece of trade somewhere outside of the corner store, you know, that's whatever. But every now and then you have these multi-million-dollar, you have these well-to-do, these middle-class, high-class men that take care of themselves. They drive a nice car. They always got a haircut. They always blah, 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 blah. But, you know, their background is the hood. And it's always perplexing to me how these men will pull up in the newest Mercedes trying to impress the niggas that are sleeping on their mama couch. You're allowing the thought process of somebody who can't even pay his own rent to dictate how you are going to love in this world. And that's never made sense to me. So there's just so much layering and so many things that I think with, but especially the Black community, that it's ridiculous. And we don't have enough time to do all of it.
Hey, what? We're finna get into this Q&A, but you just said something made me think about this, man. Homoeroticism. And how us same-sex people, you know what I'm saying, especially us men, how we have hetero homoerotic spaces that is only allowed if you are part of the boys. And we are doing shit that is literally structured around sex and sexuality, like going to the strip club. As a matter of fact, you know, most cisgender men, our first experience with pornography is with the boys. We all got our dicks out hard, you feel me, beating on it with the boys. Together. Now I know I didn't broke one of the rules, you know. So I see Damo like, no, this nigga didn't say this. But if we go in there and it's being real, I think that it's a lot to unpackage when it comes to the unconscious consciousness of trans homo negativity. Definitely. And how all of us are implicated within the spectrum of gender and sexuality, man. We're gonna get into this Q&A. You know, I know I'm gonna get a lot of flack on that one, but shit, man, I said what I said, goddamn. The Q&A, man. Website, georgeleespeaks.com. Hey, Hope, you got any type of organizations, anything you involved with that people want to get into? I'm a firm believer of putting your money where your mouth is. You know what I'm saying?
We have Arch Apparel, and they actually have these really dope ass Black Trans Lives Matter shirts that I was just sent. I literally just got it today. That's why I haven't popped the tag. I'm not doing promo for something that I'm not wearing. I just got it in the mail. But it's a really dope ass Black Trans Lives Matter shirt. I absolutely love it. And it's from Arch Apparel. And they are a Black owned trans brand that actually has really good, that shirt feels really nice. The screen printing on it is super dope, and I enjoy it a lot. And then also, because I'm out here educating the folks, y'all got to go get my book, Pick Up Becoming Hope, Removing the Disguise. The link to this is in my bio on Instagram at Hope Giselle, literally no funny spelling, the same way that you see it down there. On Lee's thing is the same way that you type it at Hope Disguise. Click the link in my bio and you can buy it there. You will be able to find it on Amazon. You will be able to find it on Barnes and Nobles. But if you're really supporting Black people, the most money comes when you buy it from the link that is in my bio. The rest of that money goes to Amazon and Barnes and Nobles, and I get like 50 cents off of that. So please make sure you click the link in my bio to make sure that I get my coin and not them, because I'm a self-published author. This is all me. This is my labor of love. Nobody helped me do this. There was not a production company. I paid for my own shoot, my own book, everything else. So please support that if you really want to get into it. It's an autobiographical piece that starts from my youth, not at my transness. And the second book, which is entitled Until I Met Black Men, will be out August 2021. So
August 2021, man.
2021. So those are my things. I also have my own podcast. It's called Can We Talk with Hope Giselle. We're definitely gonna have Lee on, because we gotta get lost in the sauce over there on Can We Talk. We gotta do that. But we had a bunch of different people on to have a bunch of different conversations. So if you're looking to be educated, or even get a good laugh, then make sure you hit up Can We Talk with Hope Giselle over on all your podcast platforms or iHeartRadio. So check that out.
Definitely. So we're gonna get into this Q&A, man. If y'all, anybody that had any questions to myself or Hope, or myself or Hope, or anything that was said, we're gonna I feel like give about like somewhere around 5 minutes. Since I feel like get into some cues, little questions. You know what I'm saying? Shout out to everybody that's tuned in. Definitely appreciate y'all, man. And Hope, man, you really said so. You dropped some shit. Like you dropped it. Like
one of my biggest mantras is that when you get an opportunity to speak. Don't waste people's time for the sake of being political. You know,
man. You said some things, man. You said some, man.
People are mad. In the words of Azalea Banks' problematic ass, the girls are gonna be fighting. But I feel like it's one of those things where you have to use the platform and speak on it, especially when you have an audience that is not necessarily yours. How do you help other people understand this more? I think that when we're talking about this, we have to be very specific because Lee was so gracious enough to cover a bunch of things. Lee was very intersectional with this conversation and covered things like homosexuality, intersectionality, trans identities, as well as the idea and the separation between sex and gender and all of those things. And so, Isaac, I want to answer your question, but I do want to ask you to narrow down what is it that you would like.
What is this?
Yeah, what do you want understanding on? What are some books that I can start with, or books that you would recommend for me having a deep understanding? Well, first and foremost, mine. So you can definitely start with my book. My book is a shorter read, and I did that on purpose because I want people to be able to get as much information as quickly as possible. So I didn't want to give y'all a whole novel because I know that people get a little bored with reading them. So it's 95 pages. If you're a reader, that's 2 hours of reading. If you're not a reader, that's 1 day or a day and a half of reading. Also, you have Janet Mock. She has 2 books, 2 amazing books, Surpassing Serenity, and I cannot recall the name of the first one, but literally you type in Janet Mock. I also have Audre Lorde, and it's a book of poems. That this has been the thing that has been my read for right now. And I love it because although it's very thick, and I know I just got through talking about how I don't like super thick books, I'm a reader. And it's just a book of collected poems. And for those of y'all who did not know, Audre Lorde was a part of the community. And there's a lot of material in this book that helps to break down transness, that helps to break down lesbianism, that helps to break down homophobia in some of these poems. You just have to be willing to do the work and like actually go in here. And also Prince's memoir, there's a beautiful poem that he writes about an encounter with a trans woman. And I thought that it was amazing. And he talks a little bit about sexuality and gender fluidity in that book. So something on the trans side, something to talk more to lesbianism and homophobia and transphobia, and then something from a man who identified solely as a heterosexual man, but was willing to write this piece about the piece is very beautiful, and Prince really details the interaction with the trans woman, and also how he was the one that wanted to interact with her more, and she basically just disappeared on him. And that was, those were his feelings after she disappeared. So I really appreciate those things, and I would say that those are a couple of books that I would definitely read. Oh, y'all are asking questions.
I'm asking questions.
They asking questions.
Yeah. And then some that I found that I liked reading was Patrick Manuel Johnson about queer theory.
Yes.
You got queer theory, but you got queer theory. If y'all know I'm country, that's QUARE. Yeah, ARE, queer theory. And I think that's something I was able to learn to get a real racialized understanding of sexuality, you know what I'm saying, in terms of the difference between being queer and being queer. Another something else that I feel like I was able to learn from was what is it? Reading about, I'm a debater, so I read a lot about trans rage. That's how I know a lot of stuff about what is it, my junior year in debate, my Achilles heel was losing to teams talking about sexuality and gender. So I made it I had to make sure I had to learn some shit. You feel me? So I think if you go to Google Scholar and type in trans rage, it's a lot of beautiful literature that's literally getting into the experiences of the trans identity. That's how I was able to learn. Patrick Manuel Johnson, trans rage, those 2 things.
My thesis is for my master's. That's why it's so funny, because I that was one of my references for my master's. So somebody says, what is the best way to defend the trans community without becoming a cis savior? Honestly, I think the best way to defend the community is by educating yourself around the issues of the community, right? And then doing exactly what Lee did today. There's a time and a place where you kind of have to know your place. And a real quick example of this is, I'll never forget, I'm not sure how many of you have ever seen this, because people posted it. people posted it as a means to be like, ooh, she got owned. But what I learned from that was that we need to better prepare, or our allies need to better research. So there was a video about 3 years ago of a young lady at a town hall, and she was talking about the bathroom bills. She was a cisgender white woman, and she was an ally. And she went in there with her boots strapped up, and she thought that she was going to own the conversation. And this young lady was just not prepared. She was not prepared. She had no arguments. She knew nothing about the community outside of the fact that she supports the community. She has trans friends. She loves them. And that was it. But guess what? That's not good enough.
That's not good enough, dog.
The best way to defend us without being a cis savior is by knowing your shit. Know as much information as you can possibly know. And then when you don't know, go back and learn some more. Ask your friends, those pertinent things. Don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. I think that so many folks have these ideas about trans people not wanting to answer those questions, or being mean or being rude. And a lot of it isn't that we don't want to answer questions. A lot of it is the idea that people ask at the wrong time. They don't know you well enough to ask the questions that they're asking, or they feel entitled to me having to educate them. And I think that as long as you move into your research while realizing that nobody owes you this information, and that it should be readily available for you on the Googles, because there are so many people that are open and willing to educate for the free on YouTube.
For the free skis, man.
For the free, that you should have access to that. So I think you can defend by doing your research and just kind of sort of knowing exactly what it is that you're talking about, and using whatever resources that you have, asking the hard questions to your friends, not strangers, and then also going the extra mile to really do the research and figure out who out here is providing the best spaces. I have a trans resource guide that Lee's PowerPoint from tonight is going to go into that, and it speaks to a bunch of different definitions. It also speaks to a bunch of different organizations if you want to put your money where your mouth is, or if you want to refer a friend. So all of these resources are out here on the Google, and on pages like mine and Ashley Marie Preston's and India Moore. So feel free to indoctrinate yourself before you go out there with your armor on, because you just might get it penetrated if you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
You don't put it on right. You don't know if you don't know how to use the tools. It don't do you no good to have it.
Exactly.
For me, how I answer that question is, I think it's two things, man. To me, I think it's two things. Is knowing when to shut up and sit down, and knowing when to get out the way. That's what I think in terms of, to me, I feel like being an ally or an accomplice in any from an intersectional standpoint, race, class, gender, and sexuality, ability to literally knowing when to shut up and sit down, and knowing when to get out the way. I think a lot of us people that have privilege and more powerful identities, we can make space and then it's getting away, just sitting away. You know what I'm saying? And you don't never want to just make space to be in the way. So it's like important that you make space, but you fill that space with voices and bodies that you're trying to talk about. You know what I'm saying? I think it'd be a little fallacious if I always talked about trans identities and I never talk to trans women, never give my platform, never give any space and place of what I'm creating and carving out, if I don't share that. You know what I'm saying? In some instances, I know not to share it, but literally get out. I'm not needed. You know what I'm saying? And sometimes you gotta know, but I have to recognize when I'm not needed, basically.
I feel it. Can you clarify intersex? I thought that you said it shows gender isn't fluid, but wouldn't intersex be physical and separate from gender? So because I'm not intersex, I'm gonna mind my business. I do have a couple of intersex friends that you might want to follow. Pidgeotto on the Instagram is definitely one of those people. They are doing a lot of work around intersectionality, not intersectionality, Lord Jesus, but intersex folks. They actually just got one of the hospitals that was performing the highest number of intersex surgeries. They got that shit shut down. So like Pidgeotto is like it, right? But because I'm not intersex, and you are absolutely right, it is something that is a little separate, because intersex is something that is literally a birth. It happens. There are people who are literally born intersex, and so that's not something that I'm qualified to speak on, because that's not how I was born, and I don't want to give y'all falsified information, because I don't research on intersection or intersex issues, because there's so much shit happening with Black trans women that to add that to my plate would be right now.
Yeah, and then this to clarify, I said that I'm also not intersex, but I do research on intersex. I think intersex proves that gender is not binary.
Yes,
it proves that we cannot force people into these male-female boxes. That's what I said.
Yeah,
yeah, that's why I said intersex. I said that it proves that we can't just push people into these boxes. I talked about how being cisgender is how you are assigned sex at birth and how people can be misassigned. And then that's what I talked about, you know what I'm saying, intersex. So that's literally what happens at those hospitals. People get forced.
I like this question here. It says a lot of cisgender Black women get offended over being called cis. Is this something that they have to get over? And is it a sign of subtle homo or transphobia? I think that first and foremost, I say this. Because I believe in empathy and because I believe in dual reception, I'm never going to tell somebody to get over or just accept what it is that I put out there, right? What I will say and what I have done in the past is remind cisgender women that cisgender is not a term that is demeaning or belittling to you. It is literally just a scientific and medical term for what you were born as. It's the same as saying female. It is literally the same as somebody saying that is a female, right? So if you don't have a problem with telling transgender women, I'm a female, you could never be that, right? Then you shouldn't have a problem with cisgender, with trans women calling you cisgender, because it's literally the same thing. But I think that it doesn't necessarily show signs of homo or transphobia. What it does show to me is that people don't like to be put in boxes. People don't like alternate names. People don't like to have, you know, their right to identify themselves taken away. And I want every cisgender woman who is right now rolling her eyes and sucking her teeth, and every cisgender man who is like, but you not a woman. I want all of y'all to think about the idea of what it's like when somebody calls you a cisgender man instead of just a man, or a cisgender woman instead of just a woman. And think about every single time that you felt the need to distinguish. Oh, that's a tranny. Oh, that's a man. Oh, you know, she used to be. Oh, you know, he used to be. I want you to think about every single time that you've made a choice to use a label for somebody, right? And I think that what this does show is that a lot of cisgender people can't take the idea that they've been labeled as well, right? Even though that label is not as harmful as calling somebody the F word. It's not as dangerous as calling somebody a T word in public. It's not as...
It's no history of violence attached to being cisgender. There's literally no history of violence.
None. You know, and so I think that what this really does call out is the idea that you need to do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. There would be no need for a back and forth of distinguishing stuff if folks didn't feel like we had to distinguish things. Y'all are the reason why we felt like we had to distinguish it, because a lot of men were just like, I need to know. If you ain't no woman, I need to know what you is, right? And so we was like, okay, cool. She is cis and I am trans. Boom. That is how it works, right?
To me, it show when Huey P. Newton say that power is the ability to define the phenomenon and make it act in a desired manner. To me, it showed that people literally have power and domination in how they are defined. Yeah. And what I find is that people want to always control the way in which they are defined. So what I know when like literally heteronormativity is about us having the privilege and not being able to be seen as cisgender, right? Mm-hmm. So when you called and identified as cisgender, you recognize that label as being something you cannot control. Mm-hmm. And literally you not being in control make you freak the fuck out. Like, oh my God, this nigga just called me something I don't cis. It's like, yes. And to me, I think that really exposes what I mean by the unconscious consciousness of trans homo negativity. You are literally emotionally invested in some shit that you have never thought about critically. You just mad to be mad. I think that's important. That's very important to think about when we talk about privilege, heteronormativity, and being able to identify people and people identifying as cisgender. That's why I always talk about being cisgender now, because I want to normalize that and make it where when people talk about being trans, it's not some weird ass hyphen adjective they throw in front of their gender and ain't got nothing in front of mine. That's literally a privilege. Talking about being hyphen American, you feel me? It's also hyphen gender. It's like if they got hyphen their gender, we all got hyphen our shit. We all got hyphen it in. So you cis, they trans. It's not hard, man. Let's get one more question though. One more question, and then you know what I'm saying. I told y'all that I knew me and Hope gonna go over because Hope started talking. I started listening and started talking more. Last question from Daniel. Can you discuss how trans men and trans women experience transphobia differently? I'm gonna let you handle this one.
So because I'm not a trans man, I cannot tell you that, and I've the trans male community be mad with me when I talk about these things because I speak from the gullet, and a lot of them don't like the idea of this truth. But my truth, and I want to clarify this for everybody that's watching on YouTube and for everybody that's watching on Facebook. My truth, Hope Giselle's truth, not the truth of all Black trans women, not the truth of all trans women, as a whole, but my own truth, mine, is that the difference is vast. You do not see Black trans men, you don't see trans men at a large amount, period, really, being found dismembered in rivers. You don't see on a regular basis trans men coming up missing or dead. You don't see videos of people antagonizing trans men while they're trying to do what they need to do to work. You don't see, a bunch of different tags around people laughing at transgender men. That's just not something that happens, because the way that transgender men get to maneuver through life is with the privilege of being assumed to be a lesbian. And I understand that for trans men, that's not a privilege because you want to be seen as a man. But it's a privilege because to be assumed to be a lesbian is still to be assumed to be a part of society. Nobody is really, really, really going, especially not in the Black community, lesbianism is embraced. If you're a lipstick lesbian, they still want to fuck you, and so they still pretend to respect you, like they do all women. And if you're a butch lesbian, then you wanted the boys. And so that is a privilege that transgender women don't get. We transition, and there are a lot of women that don't want to fuck with you unless you pass. There are a lot of men that don't respect you either way. And so I think that when we're talking about the differences, we have to be honest that there's a lot more violence that comes with the idea of being a trans woman. And a lot of that comes, especially when we're talking about Black folk, because there is this discreditation and this relinquishment of your masculinity. And in the Black community, all we have been taught, right? All we have been taught to do is to uphold and uplift and do away with buck breaking and do away with all those things and be the biggest men that we can be. And so I feel like to the Black community, and especially to cisgender and heterosexual Black men, for you to be trans is to be the biggest disrespect to masculinity, because how dare you give up that thing that makes you special? How dare you give up that thing that makes it okay for you to be a fuck nigga in these streets and we still gonna protect you? How dare you turn away from that? And that then turns into this negativity and this violence and this disgustingness in the church and all of those extra things that as a transgender man, if you pass, nobody knows until you tell them or until you have sex if you don't have the prostheses. With transgender women, there are so many. First of all, there's transphobia within cisgender women's communities. Let's be very fucking clear. You can be a cisgender woman, and if your hands are too big, if your shoulders are too wide, if you're a little bit too tall, if your jawline is a little bit too square, all of those things as a cisgender woman will get you clocked. So imagine being a transgender woman for real, and having to go through all those things. At least as a cisgender woman, if you're discovered in time, then there isn't the violence, right? It's just the jokes. But as a transgender woman, if you're outed and it's proven that you are indeed trans, you could very well lose your fucking life. And not things that happen in the same ways or in the same magnitude to transgender men. And it's not to negate that transgender men do go through things and that there is violence that's inflicted upon them, but it's not at the same rates, and it does not happen as publicly as it does to trans women, and especially trans women of color, with a focus on Black trans.
Definitely. And I'm not trans at all, but I do a little research, I do a little thinking. Me just thinking about how society is structured as masculinity over femininity, I would assume that the distinction between being a trans man and trans woman is how the privilege of being masculine and being able to navigate the world as a masculine body allows for you to your trans identity gets codified a little bit more within terms of privilege and power. I think that we have to recognize in terms of masculinity, no matter how I'm talking about masculine women, you feel me? Like masculinity automatically, I think, always comes with a different, unique navigating privilege. You feel me? Where I think that we have to just acknowledge that, you know what I'm saying? And I do think that I'm not negating that trans men go through transphobia or experience trans homonegativity. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that because their identity is more structured around masculinity, that gives them a little bit more notion to navigate the world in a way where they might have a little bit more access, a little bit more resource, a little bit more opportunity in spite of them being trans. That's how I would say. But yeah, man, shout out to y'all. Appreciate y'all. Y'all make sure y'all check out Hope's podcast. Can we talk with Hope Giselle? Hope, you got a website?
Yeah, it's hopegiselle.com.
HopeGiselle.com, man. GeorgeLeeSpeaks.com. You know what, Hope? I want us to have a little conversation about taking this show on the road.
Okay.
Taking this show on the road. You, the George, Hope, you know what I'm saying? Lost in the sauce. We're gonna talk about it. Maybe we got something right there. You feel? We got a nice little energy that we got right here, man. Make sure y'all check out my podcast, The Chop Up Show. We go live every Monday. We'll be going live tomorrow. Yeah, man. George Lee, aka Consciously. Don't forget to lead. GeorgeLeeSpeaks.com. Y'all know my motto is education is elevation. Damn it, research over me search. Y'all know Google is your friend. And the last thing I'll say is anything you ever hear Consciously George Lee saying, don't take my word for it. Go look it up. Don't take my word for it. Look it up. I don't want to be seen as the gatekeeper of truth or the gatekeeper of knowledge. I want to be able to give you the resources and the portable skills to be able to go find this shit your damn self. And so you can't just say, well, George Lee said on this video, Consciously said on this video. No. Consciously told me on this video, and then I went and fact checked it. I went and seen it, and I seen for myself that this is what it is.
Right.
Any last things you want to say, Hope?
Treat people how you want to be treated. Simple.
Hey, that's it, man. Hey, my index coming soon. I'm finna just drop an itinerary for all the Lost in the Sauce lecture series. That way, you know what I'm saying, everybody know I get into classism, ableism, sexism, racism. I get into all the isms. You can cut it off, Damo.